is Edward Johnson of Permountain Bohol. I'm going to share today an introduction to this great testimony, 40 Days in Heaven. And I'm going to try to answer some of the common questions that people have about the testimony. I can't answer every question, and sometimes people raise questions and doubts that are just not really valid. And so I'm not going to spend my time trying to convince doubters. Because if people just don't have a heart that's open, then you can't force them to open their hearts. But I'll answer some of the more reasonable questions that people have about this testimony. Now again, I give a disclaimer in my videos that I'm in the Philippines and there's animals everywhere. Hopefully, time of day is a little bit quiet, but yeah, there's always chickens who want to appear, be on YouTube, be YouTube stars. So I hear them right there. I edit out a lot of the noises, but sometimes it's too much and it's kind of funny. So if you hear the chickens and the pigs and the cats and the dogs in the background, then just enjoy the Philippines with me a little bit, and we'll just hopefully it won't be a distraction from the story. So I'm not going to describe the story's narrative in this video very much. I'm only going to do just the first part from when he dies and then gets to heaven. But mostly I'm going to focus on the idea of the story. So a testimony of a person's heavenly visitation is by nature supernatural. You don't do that naturally. Paul maybe had some experiences that he didn't really want to talk about when he wrote his letters. He alluded to it later on, saying that, I knew a guy 14 years ago. It's probably him, people say. And in this story, the guy goes to heaven, talks to Paul, and Paul gives some insight to that event, him being stoned. Being killed, actually, then being raised to life again. God raised him up. Then he continued his missionary work. And so Paul mentioned some stuff that we'll talk about it maybe in the second or third video. But a testimony of this nature is, by definition, supernatural. And you can't really approach it with a natural mindset. But we still want to have a little bit of a logic, a little bit of reason to make sure we're not being, tricked into some kind of funny story. So this happened about 100 years ago. The person that the narrative is about is Seneca Sodi. Now he is a Greek Jew, and so it's kind of interesting that God chose him as a vessel because he's got both the Gentile and the Jewish heritage in him physically, like his natural heritage. But he died. He must have been maybe 80 plus. It doesn't say exactly, and this was probably around 1900. Maybe it was 1895, or it was probably maybe 1900, in that era. So he was born maybe in 1820. So he grew up in an era before the Civil War. He grew up in an era where the world was a little bit more primitive in a way. And he mentions he knew people who were slave owners, and he knew some actual slaves in the story. So it's a little bit of an old setting, but the lessons of life are still very valid. Okay, so this story was written down not by him, but he had I met a pastor who was, I say pastor, he met a man who was good in shorthand. And so he gave his testimony to this man who, wrote it down. He checked the manuscript, and then he got it published. It fell out of print, and it was picked up again by the End Time Handmaidens, Gwen Shaw. And then when I found it on the internet, I made my own copy of it, and I was just reading it myself. And I heard the Lord speak to me about the chapter divisions. Now, what he had done originally, when he interviewed Seneca, that was a chapter. So every time the man came to him, he began a chapter, and it wasn't thematic, or it wasn't according to the plot or to the narrative. He would just end the chapter when the meeting ended, even though it was mid-event, or and he made some digressions, and then we spoke about this and did that, and he showed me this, and so God told me you don't need those divisions. And so what I did was that I cut off all that digression, put it into endnotes so it's preserved, and I chopped up the chapters according to theme and according to event. And then the title was very clumsy, and so the Lord let us rename it 40 Days in Heaven. That was our title. It's more descriptive, it's more direct. And he asked us to republish it. Now, I had some funny problems. I worked to republish this book, and I know at one point, our money was very low, and we had a lot of struggles at the time period. I was getting it ready to publish it before Christmas to be a gift. and my hard drive crashed, and then my backup hard drive crashed within 4 hours. So I had two hard drive failures within 4 hours of each other, which is really unusual. I recovered kind of a broken file. I had to rush to re-edit it for the first printing, and then we gave it out for free. But it was also that we gave it for free, but the guys who helped us to distribute it didn't let people know it was from us. It was like a big, like they took credit for it. People were like, "Oh, those guys are so kind," and they didn't know it was our labor, our work, our sacrifice to get the funding. It was all us. God let us do this thing. So as a gift that we gave to the community, to us, it was very untainted by anything we got back in return. Finally, after many weeks, a man heard it, man wanted more, and they kind of said, "Okay, well, actually, it's those guys." He came to us and I want a box. I go to China a lot. I want to give it to. He was working in some kind of infrastructure programs in developing areas, and he bought a whole case. And I'm like, well, you don't really sell it. Okay, no, I want to give you some money. He gave us enough money that was like half the printing cost. So God, works in, we say, mysterious ways. Not always, like a bargain for exchange. And so our role in it was quite muted. And that helped us, I think, to get a better reward, I think, for our service. It's supposed to be a gift to the community, and it turned out to be like that anyway. So we don't really publicize this book because God warned us that it's a bit of a special gift. We can sell it, but God asks us not to kind of corrupt it with the promotion of it. And so a lot of the American publishing companies I don't like their attitude towards their books. They kind of act like they're hawking used cars, or they're just selling like cheap knockoff sneakers, and I don't like their attitude towards what they sell. So we are trying to, we want to get this published in the U.S. and get it out. We're in the Philippines, and it would definitely be a bestseller here. But I first brought it to attention to some guys in the Philippines, and the representatives of the publishing house were both they were both men, but they were not. I mean, they were feminine men, and they buried our meeting. They didn't tell the publishing company, and they kind of blocked the whole thing. So, okay, I don't know if that was they were reacting to it, something in their heart. I don't know what happened, but I feel like being a bit blocked from publishing this. But maybe we're not ready for it, because when this gets published properly, it's going to be a big deal, I think, because people really love that story. I first read it. I read it 2 or 3 times. I love it. It gives me such a warm feeling of just peace and hope, and you just stop and think, wow, he's just walking the heavenly streets and meeting people from ancient times and people from modern times, and just a lot of parties and a lot of just free food, and just it's heaven. It's also what I noticed in the narrative is that a heavenly visitation. If you're gonna do a tour of heaven, you can't talk about stuff that's too deep and too supernatural, too crazy, because the audience are living humans, and they can't really understand the spiritual realm very much. So a heavenly visitation needs to be a little bit simplistic. You walk around. Well, you don't need to walk. Well, they got into these chariots and drive around. You don't need to do that either. You don't need to fly. You can fly. You can just be someplace. And so people are not really ready for those things. It confuses them. So in the story here, things are spoken and are viewed from an earthly perspective. And so it is a heavenly visitation, but it may help a person who is maybe not really a Christian, or someone who's maybe not really ready for the full reality of the heavenly realm. It's good for them to be able to digest it. It's for them anyway. It's like for evangelism, for like people like that anyway. So it can't be too rarefied. It has to be a little bit. It has to be something we can relate to. So people always ask me, doubters will really ask me, oh, it can't be real. What if it's not real? What if this is not true? And I thought about that a little bit. If this story is not true, okay, what impact would it have upon you reading it? Do you read stories that are not true? Do you watch movies that are not true? Do you watch any fiction at all? Is there value in fiction? And so, some of the most popular Christian movies are all fiction. There's Fireproof and there's War Room, and these are not true stories. Now, they have elements of truth in them, and they're true, representation of Christians' lives to a degree. But just because they're not real stories, they're a narrative fiction, doesn't mean it's not valuable. And so if someone came to me and told me that, I won't read it because I don't believe it's true. And I asked them, well, do you watch TV? That's not true. Do you watch movies? That's not true. You read any books at all? That's not true. I mean, you don't only read true stories, even that they're fictionalized sometimes to make it, fill in the gaps. But, the complaint people have said that they won't read it because it may not be true. I don't think that's a true protest. It's kind of like a false accusation. These people are watching videos and entertainment and things every single day, and they're still valuing a lot of those narratives that are not true. So, if that person is your friend and you want to give them a gift and they just say, "I won't read it because it's not true," how do you know it's true? Don't worry about it. Just enjoy the story. Just enjoy the story. Halfway through, they're going to realize this is a true testimony. They're going to realize that halfway through, but maybe they're just very stubborn. Maybe they're just very, they're just very contrary. So you don't need to convince people like that. If they just don't want to be touched by the Holy Spirit, you can't force them. But it's good to understand an argument if they say, I don't read anything unless it's totally true. Well, that's not true itself. That itself is a fiction. So to me, this story is just it's so full of encouragement. It makes you feel just so nice. It just gives you just a real piece of the heavenly society and just how that's your destination. And if you get that vision that heaven is real and this is actually your real home, it helps you, I think, to deal with life on the earth for this temporary 50, 60, 70 years of craziness. So I think that people just get a lot of benefit from the assurance of their hope in Christ. And then people may also ask, like, if this is true, why isn't not more clear in the scriptures about these kind of types of things? And I think about that too. That scripture is God's revelation to mankind at large. Everyone can read the scriptures, and God puts things in the scriptures that are too hard to understand, and He hides them in plain sight sometimes. But other things He says, He won't tell you in print in public. Let's say, He told John, "Don't." You heard that in John, right? You heard that. Don't tell anyone on earth what you just heard. So there's things that are not allowed to be spoken about. I also think that verse is very funny. Is in Matthew 27. Jesus has been crucified, and it says that the tombs in the city were open, and many dead people came out and walked through the city after Jesus was resurrected, and appeared to many. And that's, you'd think that would be a bigger news story. It's just written in Matthew. Mark and Luke and John don't mention that event. But Matthew mentions that other saints were raised to life during Jesus' crucifixion and the resurrection, and they walked around testifying. And I wish we had some of those testimonies. Maybe they're written down someplace and they're just waiting to be found. But imagine being able to get a testimony of those guys. For us, it's probably going to be kind of obvious what they saw and what they heard, what they would tell you. But to a Jewish person in Jerusalem in the year 35, that would probably rock their world. And so it's just funny that those testimonies are just not written down, not shared. And so it may be that it's just not for the common audience. The common audience that the Bible goes to is for anybody and everybody. But some of these things, maybe they're just a little bit esoteric, a little bit for just a different audience. So they're not really common public knowledge. So the next question people often have, if this is a testimony, if it's true, how does it relate to or compare to other testimonies of people who have gone to heaven or seen heaven since that time period? And this is what really, really struck me. If you know some of the modern testimonies of people who have had heavenly experiences, and you compare them to this story, first of all, is a very long narrative compared to a 4-hour visit or a half-hour visit. There's people who have gone to heaven for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 4 hours, and maybe time in heaven's different. Maybe it's a bit of a different time. You could be in heaven for 4 hours on the earth, but it could feel like you're there for a month. So it may not be exactly, hour for hour in the experience, because you can think faster, you can act faster. But people also on the earth, if they go to heaven, they're still on the earth. They have to go back to the planet Earth. So they can't really experience heaven as an angel might, or as a saint who's been there for 20 years might experience it. It's different ability to interact with the spiritual heavenly realm. And so there's people you've got testimonies from that have a very shallow experience. They saw heaven, they saw a city, they saw a street, they saw a loved one, and that was it. Other people just saw a light and heard voices and saw, that heard maybe music and saw their pets or saw their relatives, or they saw some familiar thing, and then there's no explanation. One guy, he saw heaven through the Benjamin Gate. He went through the Benjamin Gate a couple of times, and so if you ask him, he insists every single person who goes to heaven has to go through the Benjamin Gate. Why? Well, I didn't went that way, and so you have to also. So wow, a lot of people's knowledge is very limited, and maybe not be able to understand the big picture. So this story is why I like it so much, is because he really has a chance just to drive around the city with David and other escorts for days. He gets to go outside the city, up to into the middle of the city to the throne, meets a lot of people. I mean, for saints, he meets a lot of people. So the guy who I think about as a modern story, a modern testimony, that's very similar is Jesse Duplantis. Now, he made a video in 83, 84 that he called Close Encounters of the God Kind, and he gave a testimony of his heavenly experience. I think it was 4 hours. And he went to heaven. He saw King David, chatted with him a bit. He went to see the houses of the prophets, saw his own house. He met Jonah. And it's kind of funny that people need to see Jonah, because Jonah is a very controversial figure in many circles, many areas of religious thought, that it's a fake book because how is it possible? He'd be in a fish, and the people were very doubtful about Jonah. And so both these guys, Seneca Sodi and Duplantis, both met Jonah, and like, is it true? He's like, yeah, it's true, and it was horrible, it was terrible. It's funny that people would doubt a prophetic experience, which by nature is supernatural, and they would doubt it because of something else that's a miracle in their story. Don't you understand that we're dealing with a prophet? This by nature is supernatural. You'd expect miracles in a prophet's life because that's their business. So people who say that I don't believe in that because of, I don't believe in Jonah because the fish, or I don't believe in Isaiah because he mentions Cyrus before he was born. You guys are way over. Look, these are prophets who are prophesying the wisdom of the eternal ages. That by nature is more supernatural than a big fish or knowing a guy's name in 50 years. So a lot of the doubt people have is kind of unfounded doubt. It's kind of irrational, silly doubt. But you still deal with them, and you still got to talk to them in a way that can help them to understand what's happening. So in these two testimonies, Jesse and Seneca, they both met Jonah. I mean, Seneca, he meets Adam and Eve. He hangs out with King David for days. Paul discusses theology with Paul and Abraham. He discusses like life situations with. He meets George Fox. He meets Pete Wesley. I think he meets. He talks to, and he's in heaven for 40 days. He goes to many prayer meetings, many worship meetings, and he basically meets everyone you've ever heard of in the Bible at some point. He doesn't always talk to them, but a lot of interaction with the saints in heaven. And people get really rude about that. Oh, no, they're dead. You can't do that. I said, look, just calm down, okay? If you're in Christ, your body may sleep, but you're never dead. You're not a dead person in that sense. Now, you may die in the body, but your spirit is eternally alive. So this idea of witchcraft is not the same thing. Witchcraft is actually talking to dead people, and they're spiritually dead too, and it's all this witchcraft stuff. That Jesus isn't dead himself. I mean, if you're in Jesus, you're not dead either. So people just get their hackles up, and their Dana gets all raised up for kind of the wrong reasons. So if someone's going to come at you with that attitude, just do your best just to calm them down and maybe change topic, because they're just not going to listen to you, and no reason to cause a fight. So those people who are curious about the heavenly realm, and they feel God's Spirit leading them to get closer to Him, this is the right book for them. And you don't know, you buy it for them, you give them a copy, print it yourself, and give it to them, and maybe they're going to leave it there under the bed for six months, 6 years, until finally when they're ready for it, they're going to read it. But a lot of people, when they first hear about it, they're so eager to get a copy of it, either a free copy or they buy one from Amazon or whatever it is. But we give out many gifts because we just want to bless people and share the story. So controversy aside, it's just a beautiful story. It's just a beautiful testimony. So I'll answer more doubts and questions that come up over time. But right now, I just want to make this a short video. I want to get to the introduction to the story and just get to the first section from when he dies and then goes to heaven, and then other guys have made videos of this story, which I'm very thankful for. Actually, I'm not involved in those other publications, but it gets the story out there and it blesses people. And I feel like if someone has cheated the copyright, and they owe us something, then God's gonna make it up to me anyway without there needing to be a process. And so I don't like it when people do that. They did it to me a couple times here. They just printed it without my permission, made money without helping me out, and we needed food and stuff and they wouldn't share. But I feel like God's gonna. It's all in our ledger, and eventually God's gonna take care of it. So I don't want to get weird about this kind of stuff. This is very spiritual testimony, which I want to bless people with. I don't want to get weird about it. So get it out there, bless people with it. If you want to help us with proper publishing, then definitely talk to me. We have the copyright of the title and this edit. But we can work with you, and we'd love to see this be brought to a wider audience through the right people, though, not through people who are kind of weird, but through the right people. Okay, so let's get to the story. So he's an older man, Seneca Sodi. He's a Greek Jew, and he's living in America, but he's not American by birth, but he's living in America, I think in New York State. He ends up, he feels like he's beginning to faint, and he feels like he's getting ready to die. And he sees angels about the room, and so he tells his servants, he's got house servants, like help, we call it now domestic helpers. He gave him instructions that the angel told him, don't let your body be touched, don't let it be buried, leave it there for now. Told his helpers that, laid down and passed out. And the angels helped out with some process so his body wouldn't rot, it was kind of preserved. And he said that when he came out of his body, he suddenly was in the same room, looking at his body in the bed, seeing himself, but now he's in a spiritual body, and he had some words to his body. Okay, I'll see you soon, resurrection. But for now, I'm free. And his eyes, he said that suddenly he can see nighttime as daytime. He said, and he can see angels, and they were there before, but he couldn't see them. He realized the angels they're invisible. You can't even perceive that they're even here, but they're there. And they told him that, okay, we're going to go with this. We're going to go for a ride. And outside in the courtyard in front of the house was we would call it, Ezekiel, Elijah, sorry, this, a chariot of God. And so the chariot of God, okay, there's some conveyance. He doesn't describe it. Is it wheels or not wheels? They didn't say there was horses. It was just this thing. They got into it, and it's not on fire, but the glory of God has been near God, and so the glory of God shines on it, so it actually has got God's glory. So to your normal eyes, it's like it's too bright, so it's on fire. It's a fiery glory, but actually it's not on fire. They got into it, and then they just took off, going really fast. He mentioned that he was passing by the earth just at supersonic speed. He doesn't use that word, but just incredible speeds, then into space. And the angels are just chatting with him, and he's like, he likes these guys so much. He's like, you're the nicest people he's ever met. These angels were so nice and so kind, and not only answering questions, but he just felt such love for these guys, these angels. He also noticed that when he was out of his human body, he felt this kind of gravitational, this elastic pull on his heart up towards heaven. And this is mentioned a few times in the narrative that he feels like his heart is being pulled towards the heavenly throne. And there's an explanation that there's in the human world, there's two gravity centers. There's heaven and there's hell. And you are being pulled towards the place you belong. Either you're being pulled down or you're being pulled up. And so if you have Christ in you, you're going to be pulled towards the heavenly realm. But if you don't have Christ in you, your nature is going to be to fall down into darkness. And so if you're falling down, but you ask Christ to save you and help you out, it goes inside of you, then your nature will change into the Christ nature, and then you're going to end up being attached to the heavenly pull. He kept saying he felt this being pulled towards the heavenly realm. They explain that a little bit, which is an interesting concept, because I heard a similar idea from that mystic Indian guy. He had a similar concept, and he also mentioned that in the spirit that they're talking, but not like you think of it. He mentioned that the ability to communicate in the spiritual realm is not limited to words and language. And he mentioned that you can communicate so quickly, because even though the guy's speaking a different language, you know what he's saying. And he mentioned you can communicate without even really speaking very much. Now, other guys have told us that in heaven, there is a spiritual communication which happens without words and without a human limitation. And there can be a communication, just knowledge going back and forth directly. And so he's just out of his body saying this. And so he's, leading up to the higher communication where things are imparted through an impartation extremely quickly. But he's probably talking to a human audience at this point that, yeah, you communicate beyond human knowledge, beyond human means. And he also kind of mentions something funny, which I better talk about this because this is going to come up sooner or later. The angels mention that they're from celestial regions, and they're not they've learned their lessons in past eons. So there's a question that this raises about the link between angels, aliens, demons, what's happening on the earth right now, and this is all kind of a very very thorny and very messy topic. My article, Aliens and the Great Deception, will talk about this in depth. I don't want to discuss it right now, but we need to deal with the issue of aliens versus angels versus demons versus the deception that's happening on the earth right now. We got to grapple with it at some point. But for right now, I'm just going to mention that one kind of the nugget, and there's kind of a reference to that here. So anyway, so they bring him in the chariot towards heaven. Now they're talking. He doesn't say how long it is, and then suddenly, they see a great, a bright cloud, and then they enter into it, and they're already at the heavenly realm. Now I don't even know what that means. That there's like a portal, or is it they I don't understand. I think of it as a spiritual realm versus a physical realm. They're not quite the same, and you can go from point A to point W as you like to. Not like you have to walk there. Anyway, so their conveyance kind of reaches the shore of the heavenly realm, and he gets out. He first starts to hear music. He starts hearing praises, and when he gets there, what he sees, he mentions flowers, he mentions the trees, he mentions the pathways, but he can't describe it because the beauty of it is just beyond description. He also mentions that he sees so many people. They're just so happy, and there's all these. It's the saints, the redeemed saints. Now he's still in the arrivals area, and where he's gotten to is he asks, is this the heavenly city? They go, just slow down, okay? You'll get there, but first of all you must prepare yourself. And he's just enraptured, just in this moment of looking around, just the arrivals hall basically in heaven. The point that comes up a few times is that he's only been dead for about 10 minutes, and so he's still adjusting to the heavenly environment. He's still becoming acclimated to that realm, and it's not quick to get comfortable in that such a spiritual atmosphere. Someone described it like this: like you go from a dark room to a light room, or a light room to a dark room, or inside to outside. And your eyes, you can't see at first. Your eyes need a little bit of time to adjust. And so someone mentioned this like that he's coming from the carnal realm, and only been released from his carnal body only a few minutes ago, and his spiritual senses or awareness is not that developed compared to saints who live there for 1,000 years, or angels who have always been there. So he mentions the fact that he's getting used to it, and he was even told, you go to the city, but just take your time. Go to the throne especially, but just take your time, and that's mentioned a few times during the story. So, what we've seen on the earth is that if a minister is really flowing in the power of the Holy Spirit, and they lay hands on you, people will commonly, get a jolt of the Holy Spirit's presence, and they lose kind of consciousness. They lose kind of they fall over. We call it being slain in the Spirit. So this is just an effect of a very strong flow of God's presence, His grace, His glory is very strong, and you're not prepared for it yet. And he even mentions this is happening in heaven, that they go to the praise meetings in the middle of the city, and there's people who are newer saints, they're new arrivals, and they just can't handle the glory that much, and they also get slain in the Spirit. So it's this interesting thing that God's presence on the earth He's here, He's everywhere, but it's not as strong as we're going to experience when we get to the heavenly realm without our carnal, filter and all this nonsense. And so it helps us to understand a little bit about just the real tragedy of being stuck in the flesh in a fallen realm, that we're really separated from God in some ways that are that we're going to become reaccustomed to His presence in heaven. It's quite spectacular, actually. So along these lines, he sees people who are arriving as he does. Now he's in an arrivals area, like I call arrivals area, and there's people who are coming by the tens of thousands, and finally when they get a big enough crowd, they all go together into the city. But they're meeting, their loved ones are meeting them there, and also they're getting their first introduction statements from, usually it's like older saints or even some of the elders in heaven, and people in the Bible, you'd know their names in the Bible, and they're just telling new arrivals, okay, you're here, calm down, any initial questions. And so they're still asking questions, and they're still learning by questioning things and being instructed and being taught. But he sees a difference in people. He sees that there's some people get off their conveyance, and they're fully redeemed saints. They're fully dressed in beautiful gowns, and they have a glow in them because they've spent their opportunities on the earth in the right way of serving the Lord and serving His people, and they're more ready for that environment. But he sees a lot of people who are just not like that, and he mentions that they come out of their, the chariot, the conveyance, the thing, and some of them they're embarrassed. They're a little bit unbelief. Am I really here? Is this possible? And some of them fall to their knees because they're so weak. So he asked the people who he's talking to. I think it's one of the elders in heaven. And he asked them, like, what's the story with these people? And why is this such a difference? And the guy's like, yeah, well, this is very common. There's people who've not really, they're barely saved. And they're here, so that means there's no mistake. That means they are redeemed. But a lot of people on the earth have not spent their time very wise in, their opportunities. They've not advanced their souls. They've not got any more, he called it Christian graces, and no opportunities for them. I mean, they haven't really made any, there's no treasure in heaven for them. They haven't done anything that's worth rewarding. And so I mentioned that, if you're a redeemed saint and you really have been serving the Lord, you're going to have a lot of rewards and they're going to be in the heavenly city. And so, you ask a question about that, what are the rewards, and people on the earth will always think that, I'm going to get some extra money. Well, it may not be money. I mean, the gold streets, I don't think you need to have a lot of pocket money in heaven. It may be not just like a thing that you get in heaven, but it may be more like your ability to enjoy things more. That will come out later on when he meets an ex-slave. And the ex-slave's testimony is quite interesting. He mentions that he was very badly treated by his Christian master, and he's not seen his Christian master in heaven yet. But the ex-slave mentioned that, because of his suffering on the earth, he now can be happier than other Christians can be because of God's reward to him from his hard life on the earth. It is a higher capacity for enjoyment. So the rewards in heaven, we don't really know what they may be. Maybe your house is bigger. Maybe your house has got more display of your what you've done on the earth in God's service. But it may not just be like a spiritual representation of something that you can show your friends. Look what I did. Okay, so when he feels like he's kind of now in heaven, he turns to the angel companions who's brought him this far, and he goes to thank them. And I guess his instinct was to kind of bow down to them because they're very glorious beings, and they just stopped him and told him that look, we're actually kind of we're all fellow servants here. Just save that for the Lord Himself. And it's a funny thing that you see in the Bible sometimes where an angel appears to a person, they kind of realize it's an angel, and they want to bow down. The angel says, "Don't do that. Only worship the Lord." There must be some instinct because they're carrying God's glory, and people get awed by that and they get overcome by it. But I think that if you see in the Bible a case where there's a mysterious figure and they worship him and he does not stop them, then that would mean that it's not an angel. It means that's the Lord appearing in the Old Testament in some way that before he's in Palestine, born by Mary. So it's a funny thing that Jesus receives worship. So if you see him, I think it's like in Joshua or Judges when they worship him, they worship this figure. If they do that and he stops them, it's not the Lord. But if they do that and he receives the worship, then this is Jesus before we know him as a baby in the manger in the Christmas story. The paradise area that he's in right now, paradise just means garden, or just means park. But what they use it to describe is this area outside the city. There's still stuff there. There's some little villages, and you can have a house there, and a lot of scenery. And it seems to be very, very, very big. Now they can see the city, and they can see the throne. It's not like human eyesight kind of thing. You can see things. It's not like a mechanical eye, organ. They have different senses. And so the city is visible because also it's where God's seat is, and the light's coming out of the city. But it's pretty far away, and it takes them time to get there. But the closer they go, the glory gets more intense, and people need to get ready for it. And so what we'll see in the next episode, some of these people who are not dressed very well, the people who came off their conveyance and they weren't really ready for it, the kind of the unwise virgins, the unfaithful Christians. They're not dressed well. They're not naked, but they have just very simple, not very fancy clothing. But also, when the people begin to go towards the city, they can't really go that quickly. And there's a comment here about the tree of life. Now, the tree of life there was one in the Garden of Eden, but in heaven there's not just one. If you can imagine a billion people trying to eat fruit of one tree at one time, it wouldn't work. There seems to be actually the tree of life has different varieties, and there's millions all over the place, and so they're everywhere. It's like just everywhere. He mentions that they can't even eat the fruit yet. They're not even strong enough to eat the heavenly fruit. So what they are given is the leaf of the tree of life, and they can smell it, and that imparts the grace. They're such baby Christians, they can't even eat a fruit, let alone a meat, let alone the higher stuff. And so he notices that they fall behind and take more time. Now they're still safe. If that's you, it's a shame that you wasted your opportunities on the earth, but you're there at least. And okay, again, you're gonna say, well, I could have done more. My family didn't come with me. I could have got my friends with me. Yeah, that's true. It's unwise. It's not very faithful. It's better for you not to be such a slackard, and you should actually, get your Christianity on. I mean, come on. But people just don't. We're in a war, we're in a battle, and it's just not like that. So there are people who are just a little bit late, a little bit slow, and there's a lot of things you're going to think about, implications of what could have and what should have, and so yeah, that's for someone else to think about all those implications of what could have been and what should have been. But these people they're saved, they're there, but they need time to get used to the environment, so much so they can't even eat the fruit. They have to smell the leaf to get the strength, and that's from the Psalms, I think, right? The tree of life that leads for the healing of the nations. Nations actually means Gentiles, actually means the sinners. And so it's funny, they're still sinners in a way. They're still coming out of the sin. They're still nations, and not even the Lord's people yet. In that metaphor, they can't even eat the fruit yet. And so that's where I'll stop that right now. So that's the very first taste of the heavenly realm. When Jesse Duplantis visits heaven, he mentions a lot of the details of the flowers clapping, the trees clapping, and also it was Henry Gruber mentioned that also, that the flowers clapped and trees, and the gold street, what color it is, it's kind of transparent. And in this story, he doesn't mention those things and those details, and I'm not sure what that is, but in his story, it's more about the bigger the journey of the 40 days. Not that many small details. He doesn't stop and look at the tree and discuss the things, but some of the more modern testimonies, they notice a couple of small details about the jewels in the flowers, and about the nature of the gold streets and things like that, and the trees and the grass, and so and all the music. The trees sing, the flowers are they're alive. They talk and they sing. So those details are kind of not in this story. It's more about the journey that's going to help you to walk with the Lord, less about the details of the cool stuff that's there. But if you've got time, find Jesse Duplantis' video, or Henry Gruber's testimonies, or other ones still not mentioned by name. But so that's today's episode, and so I hope that you get a copy, get a free copy, and print it yourself. If you buy a copy, it helps feed our orphan kids and also the orphan kid helpers, which is me, which is very nice sometimes. But don't worry about it. If you don't have a lot of money, get the free copy and just read it yourself, or just ask God what's the easy way. There's videos already, people doing the whole narrative on video, and so that's great. So just get the story out there, just share it, and just enjoy it. And if you've got people who are give it as a gift, sometimes it's a very good thing. People might not read it because maybe they're not ready for it, but just give it to them and pray for them, because the prayer will open their hearts. Maybe in 6 months, or in the time of distress in their life, they may find it, and it's a seed. So let's just be generous, and you just help reach people with the message of just how real heaven is, and how full the heavenly society is, and that this is really our real home. It will help a lot of people in their journey. Amen.